One thing that becomes immediately apparent when looking up visual novel information is just the sheer amount of different terminologies, otaku words, Japanese words. It can make newcomers feel rather alienated. To remedy that, we have prepared a comprehensive list of those terms so you can feel more comfortable when discussing this particular genre with your friends, if you have any. I wish I did. We have also added entries about visual novel history in general to make this video that much more in-depth. We can assure you that at the end of it, you will leave with plenty of enlightening new knowledge about the genre. So join us as we take a deeper look into this collection of wonderfully weird weeb words. Many thanks to the sensei that is Miguel Marin, using his extensive visual novel experience to write this education video for you guys. He's seen things you people wouldn't believe. He's wrestled flowcharts like this. He's finished visual novels that aren't even finished. All these moments distilled into little knowledge nuggets to be consumed by you, lost like a chicken nugget down a fat bloke's neck. Time to get on with it. And don't forget, please subscribe to this channel if you love visual novels. It will be the best thing that you do today, even if you don't realize it. Show your love for the genre, help us grow, and spread the gospel. It helps if you click that bell button as well. We are giving away 2 Switch games, Super Mash and Lyrica 1 and 2 when we reach 3,000 subscribers. If you're watching this in the future, don't worry, we're planning on more milestone prizes. First of all, we'll start with visual novel genres because there are quite a few of them. Some of these are quite similar to each other, so don't think of them as definitive classifications. They are just the terms used in the VN community out of convenience. One of the unique characteristics about VNs is that most genres have a targeted demographic. That doesn't mean only those within that demographic can enjoy the game, but it is worth mentioning either way. Gay. Sorry, what? Now, when looking at visual novel genres, you are going to see how plenty of them end with the suffix gay. This comes from the Japanese word geimu, which you might have already guessed, but it simply means game. From time to time, you might see made-up words using it like soul gay or old gay, and occasionally, if they become popular enough, they might end up becoming adopted terms. But for the moment, we're just going to focus on what we believe are the most important ones. Kamige, Kusoge. Starting with Kamige and Kusoge, they basically mean god game or god tier game and crap game respectively. These are mostly subjective terms, so they don't mean anything other than a game being really liked or really disliked. Bishoujoge and Galge. Bishoujoge and Galge are the most popular type of visual novel. Bishoujo means pretty young girl in Japanese, and Galge basically means the same thing. They are aimed at a male audience where the protagonist is a boy and the love interest girl. Often in these games the heroines are relatively young, usually high schoolers or at their very oldest in their early 20s. Visual novel examples of this genre are Grisaya and Aokana. Otome is another really well-known subgenre of VNs. I'm sure most of you already know what it means, but this one is a genre that's generally aimed at a female audience, where the protagonist is a girl and the romance candidates are boys. You might also see this term as Otomige or simply Otome game. Examples of this genre would be Color X Malice and Cupid Parasite. Be sure to check out the video we made about the best Otome games on the Nintendo Switch. You'll definitely get the gist of what it means by watching that video. Nakige and Utsuge. Nakige and Utsuge are really similar terms, so there's a lot of overlap between the two. Nakige means crying game, whereas Utsuge means depressing game. These are meant to be emotional games, often with sad themes. If one were to properly differentiate the two, Nakige probably has the sadder connotation, as in they are more likely to have the sad ending being the actual true ending. But most Nakige can be considered Utsuge and vice versa. Out of these two, Nakige is by far the most popular term. Classic examples of this genre would be Clannad and Narcissu. Moege. A Moege is a light-hearted VN genre aimed at a male audience whose plot focuses on romance, comedy, and sexual themes. When it comes to localized PC visual novels, this is probably the most represented subgenre. Examples would be Nekopara, Sabbat of the Witch, and Making Lovers. Chuunige. The word chuni comes from chunibyo, which is a colloquial term used to describe teens who got really into otaku media and think they have some sort of superpowers. However, in VNs, a Chuunige is a game that goes completely over the top with its action and plot themes, and is usually aimed at a more adult audience. Examples would be Daizire and Deus Machina Demon Bane. Eroge. Eroge is a Japanese game, not only VNs, that include explicit sexual content. If it has even just one sex scene, then that is an Eroge. These are exclusive to PC, but they can get ported to consoles where all of the explicit sexual content gets removed. Nukige. Nukige are Eroge that focus heavily on its sexual content. What makes a Nukige is simply the proportion of H scenes when compared to plot-related scenes. That doesn't mean that a Nukige can't have a plot, just that it's generally not its main appeal. Examples would be Opie Academy and Funbag's Fantasy. They sound like absolute classics. NTR, netorare and netori. NTR are games, usually Nukige, with infidelity themes. In a netorare game, the protagonist is someone whose partner is cheating on them, whereas a netori is a game where the protagonist is the one doing the stealing. This is often used as bad endings or to have more drama in some Nukige, like in the Taimanin series, but since it's a bit of a controversial genre, there aren't many officially translated ones. Denpa. Denpa games is nowadays a pretty obscure genre of VN. They are a subgenre of horror whose themes usually surround characters falling into insanity caused by mysterious electromagnetic waves. There aren't that many VNs that fall into this genre, and the most representative ones, like Shizuku, Tsuinosora or Sayonara or Oshiete, aren't even translated. As for translated ones, we have Wonderful Everyday, also known as Subarashiki Hibi, and Chaos Child. Dating Simulator. Dating Simulator is most likely the most misused visual novel term out there. Dating sim does not mean a romance visual novel. A dating sim must have some sort of resource management to justify the word sim. That could mean time management, money management, or stat management. There aren't really that many translated Japanese dating sims, but the most representative would be the Tokimeki Memorial series. There's a subgenre within dating sims also known as Nampa sims. The main difference is that in Nampa sims, you play as a seducer and you are encouraged to chase as many girls as you can. This is a really rare and mostly old subgenre, so there aren't that many ones that I could mention. But recently the most important game from that subgenre, Dokyusei, got a remake which should be officially localized here in the West this year. BL, Yaoi and Bara. BL games, or simply boy love games, are games where the protagonist is male and the characters you can also romance are male. This genre can be divided into Yaoi and Bara. The difference between the two is that Yaoi is aimed at women, whereas Bara is for gay men. You can also see some differences in how the characters are designed. In Yaoi they look a bit more effeminate, whereas in Bara they are more burly. An example of Yaoi would be Lamento Beyond the Void, and an example of Bara would be No Thank You. That's the actual name. Yuri. Similarly, Yuri VNs are visual novels where the protagonist is female and the romance candidates are also female. Examples would be Kindred Spirits on the Roof, The Nurse Love Syndrome, and Flower le Volume sur Printemps. Excuse my French. EVN. An EVN is an English visual novel, as in a visual novel that was developed in the West. These have a bit of a stigma within the VN community and are often considered inferior to Japanese VNs. Examples of this genre would be Doki Doki Literature Club and Katawa Shoujo, so that stigma is not always true. Charage and Plotge. Going back to more general terms, Charage is a game that focuses on its characters, whereas Plotge is a game that focuses on the plot. That doesn't mean that a Charage can't have a good plot, or that a Plotge can't have solid characters. It is simply of what the VN prioritizes. To give you a better idea, any Moege is Charage and any Chuunige is a Plotge. An example of Charage would be Furiraba Friend to Lover, and an example of Plotge would be Steins Gate. Isekai. Isekai in Japanese means another world or parallel world. Even though it's always been a commonly used subgenre in otaku media, lately it has grown in popularity even more so. The main gist is that the protagonist gets transported into a different world, usually with a fantasy setting, which creates a fish out of water scenario where he or she must grow accustomed to his new life. Let's move on to structure. Common route. The common route is what we call the part of the visual novel from where all routes eventually start. It's the shared portion of the story, and your choices within it will determine in which route you end up. Its length is highly variable, all depending on the VN. There are some like Making Lovers where it barely lasts an hour, and others like Grisaya where it lasts an absolute eternity. Unlockable routes. Unlockable routes are routes that aren't available at the start of the game. You must first finish another route or clear certain objectives if you wish to unlock them. Very often, these unlockable routes are the canonical routes or lead to the true ending, so it's a good idea to know if a VN has this sort of structure before being done with it and moving on to your next one. Bad ending, good ending, happy ending, normal ending, true ending. If you have ever looked up any VN guide, you will probably have seen endings being given different labels. Bad endings are self-explanatory, and good endings or happy endings mean the same. True endings are the canonical ending of the story, as well as what's considered to be the most satisfying conclusion where all the plot threads should be resolved. As for normal endings, for a normal ending to exist, there probably has to be a good or true ending as well within that VN, and tonal wise they sit between good and bad. Flag system. A flag system is a way VNs have to determine the route or ending you will get. Basically, a choice with a flag means that depending on what you choose, you might end up with a good or bad ending, or it might also affect which character you end up with. Older VNs used to have choices with affection points related to the main heroines, and by the end or at a certain point of the common route, the story would progress one way or another as a direct result of those affection points. Nowadays, it is a bit more rare since it was a pretty convoluted way of doing things, but you might encounter this from time to time, like in the Heavens Feel route of Fate Stay Night. Kinetic VN. A kinetic visual novel is a visual novel that has no choices whatsoever. This means that there is a single route and just one ending. Common examples of this type of VN are Umineko, Higurashi, and Planetarium. Fandisc. Fandisc are games that include bonus content related to another VN. Contrary to what the name might suggest, these are made by the original developer and not by the fans. The name Fandisc itself actually is meant to be a play on the word between fan with an A and fun with a U, since in Japanese those English words share the same pronunciation. Fan, fun. You get it? A Fandisc can include routes for non-main characters, side stories, what-if scenarios, after stories for already existing routes, minigames, anything goes. There are cases where instead of a Fandisc, the extra routes are added into a re-release of a main game as some sort of definitive edition. Examples of this are Collar X Malice Unlimited and Code Realize Wintertide Miracles. Character tropes. Moving on to the character tropes, there's going to be a lot of overlap with character tropes from anime, so it's likely that you might know many of these already. Tsundere. Starting with the most well-known one, a tsundere is a character that shows hostility towards the main protagonist, but eventually it turns into affection. There are two types of tsundere, classic and modern. The classic type of tsundere is one where the changes in the tsundere's behavior is gradual and permanent, whereas the modern type of tsundere just flip-flops between the two moods. Probably the best example of a tsundere is Rin from Fate Stay Night. Yandere. Yandere are characters that fall obsessively in love with the main protagonist to the point of being overly protective. This often leads to hostility towards other girls that might be interested in the protagonist, or even towards the protagonist himself if he shows interest for anyone else but her. This part of their personality is usually hidden at first, so simply giving an example could already be a spoiler. Kuudere. A Kuudere is a character that at first seems really cold, unemotional, but gradually becomes more affectionate. An example would be Hisui from Tsukihime. Dandere. A Dandere is quite similar to Kuudere, but a Dandere is a character who is shy and quiet. An example would be Luca from Steins Gate. Deredere. A Deredere is a character who is cheerful and energetic. They are often affectionate right from the beginning. An example would be Asuka from Aokana. Imouto and Onee-san. Imouto and Onee-san in Japanese means little sister and big sister respectively. One thing to keep in mind is that as far as character tropes, this doesn't mean they're actually related blood-wise or even related in any way at all, especially in the case of Onee-san characters. Using Grisaya for the examples, Makina would be an Imouto character and Amane would be an Onee-san character. Ojou-sama. An Ojou-sama is a character with a higher social or economical status, or at least a character that behaves like that. They usually speak using formal Japanese and are occasionally rude towards others, but that's usually due to their lack of social interaction rather than out of mean-spiritedness. A classic trait of Ojou-sama characters is their iconic laugh. A VN example would be Sasasagawa Sasami from Little Busters. Loli and Shota. Loli and Shota characters are child-looking characters, with Loli being for girls and Shota for boys. There is a subtype of Loli characters called Lolibaba, which are characters with the appearance of a lolly, but that they are a lot older than they look. Censorship, ratings, and other miscellaneous stuff. Lastly, here's a handful of other terms that didn't quite fit into the previous categories. ADV and NVL. ADV and NVL refer to the way visual novel presents its text. ADV is by far the most common one, showing the text within a text box at the bottom of the screen. NVL, on the other hand, is a bit rarer and presents the text as an overlay covering the whole screen. This is the style used in VNs like Fate Stay Night and Umineko, as well as Higurashi. Backlog. A backlog is a function most VNs have that allow the players to check previously read text. Here, some visual novels also allow you to replay the previous voice lines, and occasionally some will also allow you to jump back to any line you choose. This is a good way for rechecking some information, or maybe you misread something and aren't sure, you just want to clear something up. It's very useful. Text skipping and auto mode. Text skipping is another VN function, one that allows the reader to skip text. There are two types of it, one that only skips previously read text and another that skips everything, also known as force skip or fast skip. In PC VNs, this later type of skip function is usually mapped to control, and there are some VNs that will let you skip to the next choice if all the text in between has already been read. Auto mode, on the other hand, is the function to let the text play itself. Usually you'll find in the options menu the ability to change its speed as well. CGs. CGs are those images in visual novels that are uniquely drawn to represent a certain scene. In a way, they are meant to be some sort of reward, as they aren't that abundant and only used primarily during really important parts of the story. Almost all visual novels have a gallery that lets you see them as you come across them in-game. However, in some cases, that gallery is only unlocked after clearing the game. H scenes. H scenes are a way of referring to sex scenes in visual novels. The H stands for ecchi, not for hentai. Incidentally, the CGs from H scenes can also be called HCGs. Live 2D. Live 2D is an animation technique used to animate still 2D images without needing to do a frame-by-frame animation. This style has nowadays become really popular thanks to VTubers. In VNs, however, some use it to animate character sprites, and often in Nukige, it is used to animate the H scenes. This latter use has been a common practice for a long time, even before VTubers were even a thing. Console Eroge ports and all ages. Very often, Eroge will receive console ports. However, in the process, the H scenes will be removed. these are usually called an all ages version. This term comes from the Japanese Ratings Board Ethics Organization of Computer Software, abbreviated in Japanese as SOFORIN, which is the ratings board in charge of adult software in Japan. Originally they rated the games as either all ages or 18 plus, and later on they would add 15 plus. The reason behind the removal of hate scenes in console games is that SERO, the ratings organization for console games, not PC games, is quite strict regarding sexual themes. So to get approved, nothing explicit can be shown. This is not the same as censorship some platforms can impose. I've seen quite a few times people having the misconception that compared to Sony, Nintendo does not censor their games, so there are VNs with explicit content, which is not true. All hate scenes are removed, no matter the console platform. As for Steam, it's completely arbitrary whether it will receive some censorship or not, even though as a platform the PC doesn't have those restrictions. There were some baffling instances where a VN was accepted just fine, but its sequel was not, like with Evenical and Kara no Shoujo. What most companies do is release a censored version on Steam and then have a separate patch available somewhere else, which can be free or is sometimes paid for. Sound novel. The term sound novel is a registered trademark by Spike Chunsoft. They first used it in 1992 with the game Otogiriso. This term was created because they wanted to differentiate their games from all previous adventure games, since games under this label would instead be presented as novels. One of the reasons behind that shift in focus was the increase in power from the Famicom to the Super Famicom, allowed to have more engrossing sound design, and also that thanks to the higher resolution, kanji could be displayed in a more readable way. However, as influential as these games were, if we're being pragmatic, there isn't really a major difference between sound novels and what we would consider visual novels, so this term isn't really used here in the West outside these visual novel history reasons. To give you an idea, technically Steins Gate can be classified as a sound novel, but literally nobody does. Something worth keeping in mind is that our use of the visual novel term to describe the genre isn't fully shared in Japan. We mostly use it to describe any adventure game that's made in Japan or any game that's inspired by those Japanese adventure games, whereas in Japan, they differentiate between pure visual novels, just called novel games, and adventure games. In Japan, the term visual novel was originally only used by a few creators. That being said, lately it seems to be growing in popularity there as well, so it's entirely possible that it will get adopted too as the main term to describe the genre as a whole. EOPs and JOPs. And finally, our last term, and probably the silliest one, will be EOP and JOP. EOP stands for English Only Peasant, or a plebeian. It's a derogatory term used mostly by people who read VNs in Japanese to refer to people who can't read Japanese. And in retaliation, the word JOP was created. Those wacky VN fans. Some people might take offense with these, but honestly, they are more like memes now. And that's it, that's all the terms we could think of. We hope you found this entertaining, or maybe after watching it you learned something new or two. If there's any other term you have come across that you aren't sure the meaning of, please be sure to leave it in the comments so we can give our best explanation. As always, remember to like, subscribe, hit that bell button if you want to keep up with more VN content. Thank you to Miguel Marin for writing this video. Be sure to hit him up on Twitter for more visual novel insight. Please be sure to check out some of our other content. We've got horror visual novels, Otome, and the best VNs for newcomers, which you probably are if you're watching this video. We'll see you over there. Have a nice one.